Folks, that is a theme that's so nice we had to play it twice. I am your host, the mandated reporter, Mr. Mark Radulich, and I welcome you to The Long Road to Ruin, Part 2 of the Mission Impossible series. And, of course, my co-host, who's going to make this whole introduction sound less awkward with his with his rhyming tones and whatnot. Here he is. He brings life to music, Mr. Sean Comer.
I am not your dancing, rhyming monkey.
No, pull my... That was... This is now like the second show in a row where I can't get the intro together. And it's not like I haven't done it 1,000 times. The last two shows that I've done on a Tuesday night, whether it was the music show or this one, my brain has not been where it needed to be for one reason or another. But I was actually excited about tonight. I was really into it, and still, do you ever listen to the Rush Limbaugh show?
I spent a good bit of hunting and fishing trips growing up, riding in a truck with my dad listening to Rush Limbaugh, so...
He has a certain rhythm to how he does his show, and if he gets thrown off his rhythm, he sort of falls apart too. As much as he is a professional, and for however long he's been doing this, it's been decades now. He will still, he will occasionally fuck up his own intro. So I guess I'm in good company. And speaking of good company, we have a guest tonight, Sean.
Do we really?
We do, folks. Let me tell you something about the Long Road to Ruin. We are quite the popular show. We're so popular. How popular are we? We are so popular that people come from miles around and demand, I tell you, to be part of this show. And after our first Mission Impossible podcast, I had a good buddy of mine who was from thecasualheroes.com. He came knocking on the door, and he said, "Listen, asshole, we've had you on the Casual Heroes so many times now. I demand, I tell you, to be part of this show. And I will not take no for an answer." So here he is, folks. He is one of the Casual Heroes. He's also, I just don't know if he's doing this, but he was writing the top 10 on 401's Wrestling Zone. Mr. Gavin Napier, how do you do, sir?
Doing well. How are you, Mr. Radulich?
I'm comparing myself to Rush Limbaugh, so I'm either doing delusional or I'm doing okay. Haven't quite decided yet.
You know what? I'll take it. And I am perfectly willing. I don't have rhyming skills, but I will be your dancing monkey at the very least.
You know what? Remind me something. Gavin, didn't you also used to write Ask 411 Wrestling?
I did. I was the unfortunate soul that volunteered to revive the column after Scott Keith left the site. It had lain dormant for a while, and I was sort of bored with what I was doing and running out of material, so I asked if I could revive the column.
You know what? As our guest, would you mind if I make somewhat of a pleading request of you?
Sure, go ahead.
For every blessed fuck's sake, start doing Ask 411 Wrestling again.
Aww. What's wrong with Matthew Spornica?
Well, for one thing, Forcina hasn't been doing the column for about a month and a half now. He is, and bless him for it, he's off to go tackle some bigger and better things. But the new guy doing it, it's gotten kind of painful to read on a regular basis.
Okay, once again, this shows that I don't pay attention to anything happening on 411, and I write for the damn site consistently.
No, you're...
At some point, I honestly wouldn't mind going back and doing Ask 411. The problem with doing Ask 411, at least in the Wrestling Zone, for an extended period of time, is you start to see a lot of the same questions over and over and over because nobody reads the column unless it's to see their own question get answered. That was one of the things I learned in my first run because I would literally answer a question one week and I would get the same question from different people in slightly varied forms for 3 weeks following. And it meant either people were very subtly trolling me, and I don't think Jed was reading 411. We'll understand that. or people just don't read the column unless they see their own question answered. And so that got to be a bit troublesome, and it really is just a beast of a column to write, to research, and it is a huge time drain. And right now, I don't even have time to actually write for the website that I'm co-owner of. My responsibilities are limited to podcasting there and occasionally cranking out an article once every couple of months. But at some point, I enjoyed doing Ask 411, and especially after seeing what Forcina did, he really stepped up the game and put a nice, tight format on the column. And so that sort of lays the groundwork, whoever goes beyond that. And I really feel sorry for whoever the guy is that followed Matt, because he just did a fantastic job with that column.
I would feel sorry for him, except for the fact that there's doing the best you can and maybe not quite meeting everybody's approval, because it's kind of like when Doctor Who gets a new doctor. There's this grieving process where everybody's sad to see the old guy leave. They will take every opportunity they can to shit on everything about the new guy that they can.
So this is like the bassist in Metallica? What's his face died?
But eventually it kind of evolves into a sort of first kind of a grudging acceptance, and then eventually just a genuine adoration, right up until the cycle begins again when it's time for somebody else to leave.
So it is like the bassist in Metallica.
Okay, that's the metalhead's example of it, yes. But the whole point being, Gavin, you and Matthew in particular were two of the guys that I started reading when I first started coming to the site. And I always enjoyed how informative that column could be, and Matthew always handled it with a certain degree of patience. It's being handled now with more laziness and smugness.
Awesome. That's what I want to read in the column.
Well, yeah, and just a general almost like a shock jock kind of adversarial attitude toward the readers.
That's good, because the 411 readers are known as a patient and understanding bunch who really come to the table with a level of understanding that warrants a discussion that I think could be elevated to think tank terms. I mean, real philosophers at that site who comment on articles.
Okay. I get what you're getting at, but this is one time.
Do you?
Well, and this is one time though where I would actually kind of agree with them, because when the dirty word of Wes Kirk is being brought up repeatedly in comparison, things may be starting to hit a little bit of critical mass. So
go ahead, wrap up, Gavin. But I have a question that actually pertains to tonight's topic. I want to ask you.
Okay, what I found when I was doing Ask 411, when I was doing the top 10 list, some of which went over much better than others, is that generally speaking, even with the 411 audience, and I find this to be a general rule in life, there's always going to be exceptions. But if you talk to people with a modicum of respect and treat them as if they have even a shred of intelligence and do not condescend to them, you'll generally be okay with your audience. Like Mark said, if you're going into 411 with the shock jock mentality, Godspeed, young man.
Just as an aside, let me add my own little 2 cents in, and then I'm going to go right into the topic at hand, which is part 2 of our Mission Impossible podcast. Tonight we're going to be discussing Mission Impossible 3 and Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. But my years ago when I was writing more in the politics zone than anywhere else, I stopped engaging with the commenters, with the readers, for the purposes of, for the same reason that there's an inmate presently on suicide watch screaming, "I'm going to kill you," and that is, this isn't a fight that I can win. The wall that stands, the door that stands between me and this inmate is the same door essentially that stands between me and the readers. We can't get to one another. and they can yell anything they want, and there's nothing I can do about it. And I can yell back, but it's futile, and it accomplishes nothing. It hurts people more who are seeking out your attention for the sole purposes of being validated for some reason if you just ignore them. Now, by the same token, if someone, I've lifted this ban on refusing to pretty much talk to anybody on 411. If I've made a mistake and it was brought up in a civil manner, I will address it. Or someone is making a point that I actually want to deal with in some way, and they're being cogent and intelligent about it, then I don't have a problem engaging with people. That's why I do these podcasts. That's why I do talk to people on the internet. Is I want to find, Gavin, you and I, for example, have done a couple of podcasts where or Jed and I is an even better example, where we did not exactly agree, but we were able to have a civil discussion, and that's fine. But where that civil discussion cannot be had, I choose to say nothing. And you can yell and scream, "I'm going to kill you, Radulich, you fat cracker." That's how my day went. Or you can have people, say you were the worst coverage person we've ever seen. You do this wrong, you do that wrong, and you can do that to your blue in the face, and I'm not going to respond because what would be the point? You follow?
Is it that in Florida, cracker is not a racial term?
I just wish they would say honky and break it up a bit. Call me honky. Call me white trash. Call me crack. But it was like, you fat cracker over and over and over again. It's like, dude, break it up a bit. Call me a honky. And why only fat jokes? I'm also bald. There was plenty of cue ball. You fat bald cracker. It was just like literally almost like he had Tourette's. But speaking of Tourette's, Gavin Napier. Now, you insisted that you wanted to be a part of the second discussion of I Am the King of Awkward Transitions, only second to Jeremy Lambert, Mission Impossible 3 and Ghost Protocol. What brought you to the Mission Impossible series? What exactly gave you the burning desire to want to come on the show to talk about this?
Well, first was, I've wanted to jump in with you guys on a movie podcast because I don't feel qualified to talk music with you guys. So I wanted to jump in on a movie podcast, and this is probably the franchise that I've been most familiar with out of the ones you guys have covered recently. And honestly, as far as recent action movies go, Mission Impossible 3 is probably near the top of my list over the last 10 years or so. So I figured, why not jump in with something that I enjoy?
Okay, I'm going to throw this out there, and I want to get both of you guys' feedback on it, and then that'll get the discussion going. The first Mission Impossible podcast that Sean and I did, we really revolved around the what is the spy genre, what makes up the spy genre, and sort of the death of the spy genre. And we talked about how spy movies have now sort of devolved, some might say, into just straight action movies where you really don't see the elements of spy anymore so much as it is just basically a big action movie with maybe some decorations that remind you of spy movies from the past, but ultimately they're just action movies. They may be well-done action movies, but that's all they are. Mission Impossible 3 and Ghost Protocol, I think, work best if you reframe your thinking about them in terms of they're not spy movies in any way, shape, or form. These are action movies. Period, comma, the end. Go ahead, Gavin.
I realized that the original Mission Impossible series was meant to be spy-oriented, spy gadgetry, cleverness from Ethan, things of that nature. With the 90s and the 2000s, the idea that everything had to be bigger, louder, faster sort of overtook all of pop culture. And so genuine spy movies, like you said, sort of fell by the wayside. And the closest thing that we've probably gotten to a genuine spy movie outside of Daniel Craig's reinvention of the Bond series, and even that's more action-oriented than previous iterations have been, were the Bourne movies, where Matt Damon was still doing this very action-y stuff, but there was still some layers of black ops and government meddling and whatnot. Tom Cruise sort of captured the spirit of the original Mission Impossible in the sense that he had a solution for everything and he had all this fancy stuff, and there was, things that only he could do that he managed to weasel out of these situations. But by the time we got to the third installment, we had lost everything about the Mission Impossible original concept, the spy concept, and like you said, it had morphed entirely into an action genre, and I was okay with that. I didn't expect Tom Cruise to play the role with any bit of subtlety. I expected explosions and gunfights and whatnot. I agree with you completely that if you adjust your thinking and say this is what this is going to be going into it, you'll be fine. If you go into it expecting it to resemble the original, you're probably not going to enjoy the movies very much.
I think if you're going into it expecting a spy movie, you're going to be grossly disappointed. Sean, what I like about Mission Impossible 3, and I want to get into this, and of course feel free to piggyback on anything Gavin said. What I like about Mission Impossible 3 is that as much as I said, it's an action movie, it's actually an action movie that deals with a number of different things. So it's a layered movie, and of course that's what makes movies good, is when it isn't just someone's action reel. There's a lot of things going on. There's some depth to the characters, and even if it's just one character, I'm good with that. This is Hollywood after all. What I liked about Mission Impossible 3 is that there was a theme in, can one ever be divorced from this sort of thing? Can one, is there life in this particular case after IMF? Is there life after being a spy? Bond deals with this to a degree in his movies. I like the way Mission Impossible 3 sort of captured that in the conversations that Tom Cruise has with Ving Rhames, in his relationship with Jules, and in ostensibly what the villain does with Jules throughout the movie. And of course, the villain is the very awesome in this Philip Seymour Hoffman. So let's talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about did that work for you in as far as giving the movie some depth? Can there be life after IMF?
One thing that I said about these movies the entire way, that I said going clear back to when we did the first two movies, was that really Tom Cruise is an empty vessel. He is a tool in the belt who is only going to be as useful as whoever is wielding it, namely the director and the screenwriters. And in the second movie, that was made painfully evident by the 2 hours of John Woo Bukkake that we witnessed. Right down to completely inappropriately and ego-strokingly applying the famous John Woo slow-mo white dove shot to long-haired, foppish Tommy in an effort to try to make him look like some kind of imposing action figure. And the fact was we put John Woo in charge of the movie, and well, damn it, we sure did get a John Woo movie. On the other hand, in the second movie, we got J.J. Abrams helping this thing, and what we got was something that J.J. does relatively well, and that was he managed to make an action movie that actually included some studies in character. As you put it, we scaled Tom back a little bit from just being a non-stop explosion-evading death machine, and all of a sudden we started really looking at what kind of toll all of this is taking on him outside of the mission. And to be perfectly honest, it's really pretty interesting. I still kind of miss the subtlety of the first Mission Impossible and how it had moments of quiet tension that this one really didn't have. But the fact is, you put Tom into this situation, you gave him some interesting story development, you gave him a great villain actually two great villains in Billy Crudup and Philip Seymour Hoffman. And the result was something that was infinitely more intriguing than Mission Impossible 2, because there were actually some stakes to this one. However, I really liked Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol because, for one thing, we're not getting a director who's quite so pigeonholed style-wise as we did the previous one. What we've got here is we've got the very first live-action film by Brad Bird, who's better known for being the maestro of Pixar. The man behind the Toy Story movies, the man behind Iron Giant. Pretty much almost, I think, all the CGI stuff they've done has been Brad Bird. And so what we get here is an interesting combination of a return to the cat and mouse style of the first movie and the building of the tension and Ethan being the man, the spy on the run. And it's combined with the stylized, entertaining action of the third movie. And, well, I guess the hair of the second movie. So it really it's kind of a beautiful thing. It's really, at this point, it's, I think, right up there for me with the first one as being the best in the series. And quite frankly, I think this is the only time in all the episodes we've done of this show when I can honestly say, well, then again, we haven't finished Rocky yet, so we got to get around to that one, in which the most recent movie in a franchise actually kind of elevates the quality once more back up to the level of the first one.
I would tell you that 3 and 4 of the Mission Impossible series are better than the first two. If you allow yourself to believe that the spy genre doesn't exist, if you're just looking for pure action movies with a certain degree of suspense to them, then yeah, I would tell you that I personally enjoyed 3 and 4. Gavin.
Well, may I address just this one thing that Gavin said, though? And I might have misunderstood him, but just in case, I just want to throw my opinion out there on this. About the most recent Bond movies, about the Daniel Craig movies, I actually think they've done the best job of any of them so far of adding character to Bond and putting him in a situation and really seeing how he develops through it psychologically. From him having to really make his bones in Casino Royale to dealing with a fixation on vengeance in Quantum of Solace to really kind of having to get his confidence back. What's the name of the most recent one? I'm blanking on it.
Skyfall.
Oh yeah, Skyfall. Thank you. To having to really kind of get his groove back in Skyfall. So I don't know that the Bourne movies were really that indicative of character development. But the more recent Bond movies, I would certainly say that there's an attempt to give them some character.
Well, here's what I want to.
I do.
Go ahead, Gavin.
Go ahead, Mark. I was going to say I do agree that there was a lot of character development with Craig and with the Bond movies, and no argument there. What I was saying in reference to those is just to the spy genre in general, because there was more of an emphasis with the recent Bond movies, and it's a natural thing. I don't blame them for it, just because of what movies are able to do now compared to what they were able to do when Sean Connery and Roger Moore were playing the roles, is that they have put a little bit more emphasis on the big action sequences in Bond than we have seen before. That doesn't take away from the character aspect at all. Just that even the Bond movies and the Bourne movies, which I do feel like are probably the closest thing to spy movies that we have now, at least in large market releases and wide release, I feel like even those are getting bigger on action and gravitating more towards an action tilt on the spy genre.
Hang on, let me say this. The 1960s Batman had more detective work going on than most of the quote-unquote spy movies of modern Hollywood. All right? Let's be clear about this. They have decided the audience not smart enough or not patient enough to watch these people try to figure stuff out in the movie. Instead, it's one thing after another, and instead of the only thing that even comes close to a spy genre meme is that, yes, there's lots of gadgets in these things that do stuff, but ultimately it's a bunch of supermen running around trying to defeat the bad guy. These are elaborate chase movies, and I'm not complaining about this. But
No.
let's call them what they are. They are this is the Fast and the Furious on feet. And I'm sorry, Tom Cruise crashing a BMW, off of a platform so that he can, disarm a bomb. Hilarious, silly, hilarious, and awesome.
And kids, say it with me now. When Hollywood can't get it done with story, the solution always is more
dinosaurs. We are not afraid to use catchphrases on this show, but Gavin,
and that's how you do it. When you don't have somebody who kind of like Brian De Palma did in the first movie, when he had actually a really good, tense story that was well built and kept you guessing. The solution for the three people who followed, as much as I liked the way the last two approached it, was boom, 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 boom. More of Tom Cruise flying around in front of the fireballs and crashing.
Let me sum it up this way. I'm in the middle of listening to the audiobook of Orange is the New Black by Piper Kiernan, who is, of course, the centerpiece of the Netflix exclusive show Orange is the New Black about Piper Chapman, who, if you don't know, is about a uptown yuppie blonde woman who goes to federal prison for a crime she committed 10 years ago. In any case,
yep.
What she says in the book is, and because this is a film podcast, this is an even more hilarious example of what I'm talking about. The highlight of the afternoon movie at the federal prison, the one that got everybody in the prison that could come and watch this thing, the event of her year in prison, as far as movies went, was Walking Tall, featuring The Rock. Okay, apparently this had the Danbury prison just streaming with estrogen. The women were coming from everywhere to watch The Rock hit people over the head with a 2x4 like Hacksaw Jim Duggan. The antithesis of this, Lost in Translation. Okay, a movie that I'm sure most of us movie people thought was fantastic and really, really enjoyed because you had to sit and think about it. The Danbury prison inmates, the women therein, absolutely hated it, thought it was the worst thing ever. If you're a Hollywood executive and that's what you're dealing with, when most of the world resembles a Danbury federal prison and not so much us movie nerds that enjoyed Lost in Translation, you're going to fill your movie with The Rock running around hitting people with a 2x4 or Tom Cruise crashing a fucking BMW into the floor to disarm a bomb than you are with tense scenes of detection and such. I think we can safely establish that.
Allow me to make still another comparison. Wrestling fans, guys, we're talking about the difference here between watching CM Punk and Samoa Joe wrestle to back-to-back 1-hour draws, or watching Bryan Danielson and Nigel McGuinness cement themselves as the modern-day Ricky Steamboat and Ric Flair, compared with, say, 15 minutes of New Jack and the Sandman whacking each other over the head with household objects. We're comic book fans. We're talking about the difference between your standard 90s Image comics versus something like, I don't know, Crisis on Infinite Earths, or The Killing Joke, or Batman Year One, or Superman Red Sun, or Kingdom Come. To kind of give you an even better idea of just the extent we're talking about here.
So getting back to some of the depth of the movie, what I want to ask Gavin about is, in Mission Impossible 3, there are two arcs, there are two bits, interactions and such, that sort of establish Tom Cruise and sort of Ethan Hunt, what is going on in these movies. And that is, one, he has tried to remove himself from active field duty and he's become a trainer, much to the chagrin of the agency itself. And they sort of tell you in flashback that he's been training Kerry Russell, and she's his prize student, and she ends up dead, which he takes some degree of guilt over. This is meant to sort of portray him in this light where you know, and it's, to a certain degree, he wants to avenge her, but there's also this brings up some self-doubt. There's a lot going on here. My question to you is, was it enough? Do you feel like there was enough of what they were trying to get across with him and Kerry Russell and their relationship, or did the movie sort of shortchange that relationship in order to get on with more dinosaurs?
Well, I think it speaks a lot to what we've already touched on and what you want out of this movie. If you are looking for a great example of storytelling and layers upon layers of character development before we get into the meat of the movie so that we can sympathize with where Ethan Hunt is when all this is happening, then no, it's not. If you want a J.J. Abrams Mission Impossible flick, it's probably more than you should have even hoped for.
What you're saying is, Clark, shut up. The bar is on the floor, and we went well over it. Stop asking for more.
No, I don't mind asking for more. And you know, you talk about the difference in whether you're watching Ring of Honor or ECW, or if you're reading the over-the-top 90s Image comic books or one of the seminal works of the genre. You know, my response to that is they both have their place. And, you know, I enjoy Mission Impossible 3 greatly. Like I said, it's one of my favorite action movies of the last 10 years. It's one of those inherently watchable movies. If I'm flipping through the channels and I see it on, I'm going to stop. At the same time, I will sit down and watch and relish every second of Daniel Day-Lewis's performance in There Will Be Blood. Mm-hmm. And there's a place for both of these. And to me, just the fact that they cared enough to give us any backstory beyond just saying, oh, he tried to get out after his protege got her head blown up. You know, the fact that they actually gave us a flashback scene and they went to the trouble of casting an actress that people recognized and see as a sympathetic character because of the nature of the role she typically plays, I think that's going well beyond expectations for this movie.
Ain't that some sad shit?
And when you consider the target audience for this movie, they probably couldn't have cared less if they'd skipped it entirely. If they would have handed out flyers before the movie and said, we have cut the first 20 minutes of this movie, here's what happened, enjoy your explosions, they probably would have been completely fine with it.
I now want to write a movie called Enjoy Your Explosions.
I have a sneaky feeling that's what we may end up eventually renaming this podcast.
Enjoy Your Exploding Dinosaurs?
Beautiful.
Enjoy your exploding dinosaurs while Saban suplexes your train.
Just so I can say that we did it in case we get too long into this conversation and I forget to talk about it, let's talk a little bit about probably one of the greatest action movie villains I've seen in a good long time, which is really funny considering he's, you know, how old this movie is. But too often you get villains in these action movies who either have no personality and they are just, you know, as Sean said before, just kind of death machines, or they're over the top, you know, and they turn into, you know, sort of Cruella de Vil. Philip Seymour Hoffman plays a villain in this movie that jumps off the screen as if, like, forgetting for a moment that this is an actor playing a role. That could have been a real person. And his bit where they've kidnapped him and he was like, do you have a girlfriend? Do you have a wife? Do you have any idea what you've done? To a degree, I've had to say that to people. I've actually had to say to somebody, do you have any idea what you've done here and the consequences you just now brought upon yourself? Like having to explain it to an idiot child or an inmate. Oh, my God. That was an amazing performance. I don't even have a question here, Gavin. Just flake the man's performance.
There are three moments in Philip Seymour Hoffman's career that stand out to me, and in no particular chronological order. They are his performance in The Master, which I found to be just incredible. The only watchable moment of Along Came Polly for me is during the first 5 minutes of the movie. If you go back and you watch the opening to that movie, you'll see Philip Seymour Hoffman walking into the wedding rehearsal. And he hits the dance floor that has been set up, and he takes one of those Chevy Chase-type falls that you see in movies that it always looks like the actor never fully commits. He hits that floor at about 110 miles an hour, bounces up, doesn't miss a beat, and keeps walking. I laughed until I cried and regretted the rest of the movie.
Kind of Seth Rollins suicide diving into the railing.
Yeah, pretty much. And then there's this performance. And like you said, it jumps off the screen. He is better than this movie. And that's not an insult to this movie. They could build a franchise around that character.
And I want to make that clear. And please continue, but I want to make this clear. Too often we've talked about in this podcast about somebody like a Jim Carrey who can't act, but people who are just chewing scenery, just chewing it to death and spitting it out, and he's not. This was almost the antithesis of chewing scenery. This was, you're right, he was better than this entire movie, and it was natural.
The scene that you referenced in particular, when he's just sitting very calmly aboard this airship and hands tied behind his back, and he just so smug and so calm. And the previews alluded to it and didn't give you any real sense of context, but those two lines, I'm going to find her, I'm going to hurt her. There was no over-the-top threat, I'm going to cut her arms off and mail them to you. There was no screaming, frothing at the mouth. It was just a very simple statement of fact telling Ethan Hunt, this is what I'm going to do, and it's going to be your fault.
Nor did he say in an incomprehensible breathing machine that this was Gotham's reckoning.
The best villains in any medium, whether it's book, novel, comic book, movie, wrestling, or real life, are the villains that at least have some motivation for what they're doing that you can sympathize with. And no matter how terrible of a human being Davian was in this movie, you put yourself in his position that by whatever means you're making a living for yourself, doing whatever it is you need to do, and this team comes in and ruins everything, snatches you away from your life, holds you hostage, and you have this young hotshot high school quarterback, pretty boy, always gets the girl, just looking at you with this smug look on his face. How are you going to react? You're going to hate everything about him, and you're going to want to make his life miserable. And so, on some level, no matter how evil he is, no matter how misguided his motivations are, you can relate to the character. And that's what I think makes the villain so strong, is because it's played in a relatable way by Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Yeah, he's responding naturally to the events occurring around him without being over the top. But yet there's a chilling menace that makes him one of the greatest movie villains I've seen in quite some time. I referenced Bane, and it's not that I know you hate Batman, The Dark Knight Rises, and that's a whole other podcast. But it's not like Bane who was who was sort of delivering. It's almost like a weird Shakespearean thing where it's so over the top. It's meant to be epic. It's kind of like a 20-minute guitar solo. Like at some point you're just like, all right, get on with this already. He's just very matter of factly without being sort of deadpan. It was with all of the things happening around him, he was reacting naturally, but he's a bad guy. And so he was reacting as a natural bad guy, and that's what makes it a brilliant performance. Sean, I said this on Facebook, and this is what I want to transition to before we start talking about Ghost Protocol. In the first movie, what was one of the chief complaints of some of the old cast of Mission Impossible was that they felt betrayed by the idea that in this movie, in the original Mission Impossible, the IMF turns on Ethan Hunt, and and that's sort of the plot of the thing. But it was interesting enough, and it was strong enough that if you divorce yourself from the series long enough, you're okay with it. Kind of lends itself to the conversation we were having about Justice League Doom, in the sense that it's something. It's a very traditional sort of movie plot where what you have come to accept as good, what you have come to accept as normal, is now turned upside down, and the hero has to deal with his entire world crashing around him. Okay, great. That's a tale as old as time. Here's my problem. It's 2 movies later, the exact same fucking plot. Okay, what is it with you going back to the well once too often, to the very same idea that once again the IMF has turned on Ethan Hunt? I said it on Facebook, and I'm going to repeat it now. At some point, wouldn't Ethan Hunt have just quit and said, I can't trust you people as far as I can throw you. I don't want to do this anymore.
Oh, monkey spanking Jesus. You know what? Let's put aside Ethan Hunt's obviously infinite fucking patience with this. Let's take into consideration the fact that IMF is clearly exercising shoddy background checks on their upper-level operatives and executives that are on par roughly with CTU. Okay, in the first movie, I understood it. I understood that it made for a compelling plot, particularly the way Brian De Palma and the actors and the writers all executed it, especially with the fact that you had a chance to turn the entire legacy of IMF and Mission Impossible on its head by making Jim Phelps the bad guy. Okay, fair point. That was a controversial bone of contention with the original cast, but quite frankly, I happen to think that especially Peter Graves and Martin Landau missed the forest for the trees. They missed the fact that it was in the spirit of the original show, but it was just given a glossier, more modern look to it. They really didn't see the big picture. So, okay, I'll defend that in the first movie. Second movie, okay, no such nunfuckery to be found. This time, though, and into the fourth movie, okay, now it's getting ridiculous. and I guess the really sad part, if I may briefly wax political, is given the goings-on in our current federal landscape, the sad part is I'm not sure this depiction is really all that far off.
Well, that's what I was going to throw in real quick, was art imitates life. And given what we've seen, without turning this into Mark's political podcast, which that's another one I need to jump in on sometime, it seems on one hand unrealistic that the high-ranking executives of this organization within the government repeatedly turn up corrupt and trying to kill their own agents and this and that, and then you flip it over to Fox News or MSNBC or whatever sort of news channels we get here in America, and it's pretty much the same thing.
Right.
Would you be referencing something like maybe The Fast and the Furious, and I don't mean the movies, Gavin?
It's out there. I mean, between what's happening at embassies, what's happening with the IRS, it's out there. High-ranking officials within the government, and it's not just this administration. It's been going on for years and years and years and years and years, and probably as far back as we could figure it out if we had the means to research every administration in depth. It's out there. It happens. And so, on one hand, yeah, it seems unrealistic, but then you have to remember the age in which we're living and the fact that it does keep happening.
Please come join our federal agency. There's a good chance we may turn on you and have you killed. It's a good recruiting post there. Uncle Sam wants you to possibly be killed.
And you know what? And that's an upside to have to having a plot device like this is, to a certain extent, it does imitate life, and it does make it intriguing. Fair point to that, too. However,
doesn't that weaken the movie, I think, when you keep hitting this? It's not a song, for Christ's sakes. If you keep going back to the same hook and chorus, eventually you're going to bore the shit out of your audience, or not. And I guess that's the question I have, is did this not make for a weaker movie?
Well, but that's the point I was just going to make. Is I was going to say, but you've now done it in 3 separate movies to varying degrees now. And in my opinion, I stand by it. Nobody executed this plot better than Brian De Palma did. Quite frankly, and yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure there is going to be a 5th Mission Impossible. Don't do it again.
There is. J.J. Abrams will be at the head of it.
Okay, dear Paramount Pictures, please stop having the IMF turn on Ethan Hunt. Yeah, either that or the movie has to be they turn on him in the first 5 minutes and he shows up and kills everybody in the fucking office. I want this to end Rambo style, where he's firing a Gatling gun in the White House into the air and screaming like a retard.
It's time to. It's time to retire that. And like I said, the only reason it worked so well in the first one was in part because of, number one, the way it was executed technically, and number 2, the fact that you were doing this, you were adapting this show to the big screen for the very first time, and you had that one chance, that one and only chance to take everything that was known about the TV show and flip it around and really build some genuine intrigue off of that. You did it. You can't play that card again because it's never going to be an example of
Is this not an example of the Lex Luthor effect that we talked about in the Superman movies, where studios get an idea, in their head of something that works the first time and go, we can't stray from that. That worked well the first time. Let's not take any chances here. So, in the original Superman, the villain was Lex Luthor, played by Gene Hackman. He has to be in every movie now because that one worked really, really well. In the very first movie, the IMF turns on Ethan Hunt. We have to do it in every movie because it worked really well the first time. I mean, do you see what I'm saying? Where I think Hollywood with franchises gets into these ruts where they're like, no, let's not stray from what worked in the original film instead of maybe taking. I mean, and I think to Sean's point, the John Woo one, the second Mission Impossible, was by far the most different of the 4 from what you expect in a Mission Impossible movie. Not, good, bad, or indifferent. It's the most different. And I don't know, and I'm not looking at the numbers, but I'm not sure how well it did in comparison to the others. I think Ghost Protocol, did the best out of all of them. And maybe that's what studio executives saw. They were like, again, when examining what made a film work and and why tickets were sold, they probably came to the conclusion that it was because of the dinosaurs.
Well, I don't necessarily have a problem with the formula either. If the formula works, go back to the formula. But be mindful of whose hands you're putting the formula in. Because it's one thing to give this formula to Brian De Palma and say, okay, Ethan Hunt is going to be betrayed by IMF. We're going to turn what people know about Mission Impossible over on its head and run with it. That's all we're giving you. Run with it. That's one thing. It's a completely different thing to give that same formula to J.J. Abrams to rehash. With Brian De Palma, you're probably going to get a movie that focuses on that plot with some action surrounding it. With J.J. Abrams, you're going to get that plot propping up the action loosely. And again, I don't have a problem with the formula, but be mindful of whose hands you put the formula in, because you're going to get varying results depending on who is controlling the camera.
Well, what was amazing was that in Ghost Protocol actually plays off some of the events from the first movie with regards to Tom Cruise and Jules. In fact, it is that relationship and the whole concept of their life after IMF that sets up the rising action of Ghost Protocol, which I liked. If they're doing a 5th one of these and fucking IMF turns on him again, if he doesn't say not again or something along those lines, if he doesn't react viscerally to having been betrayed a 4th time, the movie is shit. I don't care how many things blow up or how many buildings he falls off of, which seems also to be a reoccurring theme with him. Sean, I know that we've been jumping around a lot. Anything else you want to add about 3 before we move directly into Ghost Protocol?
I think it's a movie that when it hit theaters, it's actually a good thing that it did as well as it did, because unfortunately the other thing that a lot of people are going to remember this for is the fact that Viacom had to kind of jump in between a few of its children and said, don't make me come back there. For those of you not completely familiar with it, right around the time this was getting set to hit theaters, Trey Parker and Matt Stone of South Park concocted an episode called Trapped in the Closet. The whole thing was one big satire of Tom Cruise's fanatical devotion to Scientology. Also included a several minutes long, fairly detailed montage of the core beliefs of Scientology, complete with the mocking caption at the bottom. I believe it's either this is what Scientologists actually believe or Scientologists actually believe this.
The controversy of that episode was they were inferring that Tom Cruise was gay by demanding he come out of the closet.
That as well. When the truth was, they used that line repeatedly, just based on the fact that Tom runs upstairs and shuts himself away in Stan's closet because Stan unfortunately has to break it to Tom that no, I'm not the reincarnation of your leader. I'm not L. Ron Hubbard, and it just snapped something in Tom's tiny little brain, and he goes upstairs and shuts himself away in Stan's room. And so repeatedly the joke is Stan telling everybody, Tom Cruise won't come out of the closet.
Come out of the closet, Tom.
Yeah.
Tom, come out of the closet. Wasn't this around the time that he went crazy and married Katie Holmes and took her hostage?
Right around then, yeah. But the bigger point is the fact that you have to remember that both Comedy Central and Paramount Pictures are under the same umbrella. I believe they're both owned by Viacom. And as a result, Tom pitched, as producer of Mission Impossible 3, pitched a little bitch fit to the higher-ups and broke it down to brass tacks as either you pull the episode from air, or I'm not going to go out on the road and promote your massive summer blockbuster. Because really, it was a case where Paramount needed Tom more than Tom needed Paramount. And so Paramount acquiesced. I believe this is what happened, Mark. I'm a little bit fuzzy. I do believe, didn't Comedy Central actually acquiesce and yank the episode?
Made air.
If I remember correctly.
I'll tell you in a second. I mean, by yank the episode. Go ahead.
I'm a little fuzzy too, but wasn't this sort of what led to Isaac Hayes leaving the show because he got offended that they mocked Scientology?
Something like that. Yeah. Yeah, at which point Matt and Trey wisely fired back, well, you had no problem cashing our checks when we were making fun of the Jews, Muslims, Protestants, and Catholics.
All right.
Literally everyone.
I'm going to just read this real quick. A blog entry of HollywoodInterrupted.com in March 2006 alleged that Viacom, parent company of Paramount and Comedy Central, canceled the rebroadcast of the South Park episode Trapped in the Closet due to threats by Cruise to refuse to participate in the Mission Impossible 3 publicity circle. These assertions were soon also reported by E! News and American Morning. Fox News attributed threats from Tom Cruise stating to back out of his Mission Impossible 3 promotional duties if Viacom didn't play a repeat of the episode, which is what I thought, because I remember seeing it air live, as evidence of bad blood between Cruise and Viacom. The Washington Post reported that South Park fans struck back in March of 2006 and threatened to boycott Mission Impossible 3 until Comedy Central put Trapped in the Closet back on its schedule. Melissa McNamara of CBS News later questioned whether this boycott hurt the Mission Impossible 3 box office debut. Even political blogger Andrew Sullivan encouraged a boycott of the movie based on claims that Cruise allegedly forced Comedy Central to censor a South Park episode about Scientologists. Make sure you don't go see Paramount's Mission Impossible 3, Cruise's upcoming movie, Sullivan wrote. I know you weren't going to see it anyway, but now any money you spend on this movie is a blow against freedom of speech. Boycott it and tell your friends to boycott it. So there you go.
I went to see it anyway just because of Philip Seymour Hoffman.
I don't think I'm going to do anything that Andrew Sullivan tells me to do regardless.
But, no, to get back to the point, though, after Mission Impossible 2, this really was a step toward getting it back onto what I consider to be the right track, which is instead of being just a nonstop, straight-up action movie, being more of a spy and espionage thriller with liberal amounts of action interspersed into it. However, I will throw in just one minor gripe about this, very minor one. When you are building up your entire movie, or I should say rather a good third to two-thirds of your movie to be accurate, around your hero retrieving a device that's under close surveillance, and you've just staged yet another big elaborate break-in scene, don't actually have him obtain the device off camera.
Actually, can I add something to that? If they're going to continue to have him break into places to steal something, can they please have his entire IMF team consist of the Ocean's 11 crew? Complete with that music. We'll have a small Asian, fall into a tube. Brad Pitt will be eating something. The whole 9 yards. Let's just merge the Ocean's 11 series with Mission Impossible and do that for the entire movie. If that's what we're going to do.
Isn't that sort of what Monuments Men is?
What is what?
What now?
Monuments Men? Have you seen the previews for Monuments Men?
No, I've not seen the previews for Monuments Men.
Oh, it looks fantastic. It's like a World War II heist movie. It's based on a true story of this team of civilians that enlists in order to retrieve historical artifacts from Jewish culture that Hitler is going to destroy. It's Clooney, Damon, Bill Murray, John Goodman. It looks fantastic.
Okay, this is now on my must-see list.
Clooney and Damon are doing this, basically knowing that this was World War II Ocean's 11.
Yes, and it looks. I cannot stress to you how good it looks. I saw the previews at Elysium, which my rant on Elysium be best served for another separate podcast.
Quick question: is Elysium just one big liberal agenda screaming at you from the screen?
Yes.
Awesome. That's what I thought.
But Monuments Men looks absolutely incredible. That and The Counselor, the new Brad Pitt film from the guy that wrote No Country for Old Men.
Okay. In the interest of time, I want to move on to Ghost Protocol, the highest-grossing Mission Impossible film in the series. Ghost Protocol takes place after the events of Mission Impossible 3. Mission Impossible 3 ends with, at some point in the movie, Tom Cruise and his girlfriend Jules get married in the hospital. Shortly thereafter, she's kidnapped, presumed dead. Then she isn't dead anymore. They rescue her, and they go on and they live happily ever after, except they don't. What you find out at the onset of Ghost Protocol is that Tom Cruise is in a Russian prison, and she's allegedly dead, or they broke up, or she's on another planet, but they're not together anymore, and that's all you need to know, and sort of the history of that and the mystery of it all will be revealed as the movie goes on. So Ghost Protocol, as far as the IMF turning on Ethan Hunt, I don't think that was the case so much as the twist on it was that because of the attack at the Kremlin, which is blamed on IMF when it wasn't actually them at all, they are disavowed, and the agency for a period of time no longer exists, and they are sort of out in the cold. I thought that was an interesting twist on the idea. They didn't out and out, there aren't agents within who have decided that because of their disillusionment or because of a particular worldview that they've adopted, have decided to turn on the on IMF and the country at large. Whereas for political reasons, they can't continue to have this agency in existence until this mess gets cleaned up. With the idea that it will probably be resurrected at some point down the line. But for right now, everyone's got to lay low, and they've got to operate to a degree out in the cold. I thought it was an interesting idea. I thought the other thing about it was this is not necessarily Tom Cruise's team. It's sort of a band of misfits from a failed mission sort of coming together and forming a unit all on their own and sort of having to work with each other. Jeremy Renner's character, who we all know is Hawkeye from the Avengers film, is sort of brought in after the director is killed. Then there's these two other, Simon Pegg and the other actress, Paula Patton, who is on their own mission, which becomes which falls apart at the seams. They all end up joining up with Tom Cruise, and they sort of have to figure things out together. I actually thought, in as far as that was concerned, that was an interesting part of the movie for me. That dynamic, certain things that the characters do. Simon Pegg, his story was in the previous movie. He was he was sort of monitoring the computer at the agency. Now he's a field agent, and he's sort of having to deal with that. So, Gavin, tell me what your thoughts overall on Ghost Protocol and how they sort of kept the balls in the air and continue to I think put a fresh coat of paint on what was because one could argue becoming sort of a tired franchise.
I did think it was a nice breath of fresh air for the franchise. It exceeded my expectations. I will say, however, the one major sticking point I have with Ghost Protocol is that it suffers from a severe lack of Ving Rhames. I always enjoy seeing Ving in really just about anything. I'll watch what I know, in fact, to be a terrible movie if he's in it, just for him. He's a personal favorite of mine. I know he's not the world's greatest actor. I think he's a fine character actor. He does well in bit parts and supporting roles. And having a Mission Impossible film without Ving playing a major role in it just felt sort of off. And like you said, that may have been by design because they may have just wanted to put a fresh coat of paint on the franchise that had really just sort of faded from consciousness, which was surprising because generally Mission Impossible 3 was pretty well received critically. I think it hit, 70% on Rotten Tomatoes and Metacritic. And for a movie of its type, for a summer blockbuster movie, that's pretty strong.
93 certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yes. For Ghost Protocol? Yeah.
Yeah. And a 73 for Metacritic.
I was talking about Mission Impossible 3 doing well critically. And I expect them to capitalize faster off of the success of that. But Ghost Protocol, I think, did a good job of sort of shifting the direction, putting Ethan Hunt in a different, disadvantageous situation, and allowing some new cast members like Simon Pegg to step up and do what he does. I'm not a huge Simon Pegg fan. It's not my particular style of comedy, but for comic relief in a movie like this, the little one-liners and situations and facial expressions that he was able to contribute did a nice job of breaking up the tone when necessary. Maybe just I feel like the act of Philip Seymour Hoffman was too hard to follow. But this
one they almost went with no villain. There's
right.
an absent villain in this movie. It's just kind of an ominous threat that's, it's almost, this is almost like a disaster movie where there's basically sort of a tornado, roaming about that they have to deal with, but there's nothing to it really. There's no character there.
And there was just, for whatever reason, Ghost Protocol didn't suck me in. It did not engross me the way Mission Impossible 3 did. Again, it's not to say that I didn't like it. I enjoyed it. It was a fine movie. To me, it was a bit of a letdown from MI3, though.
Sean, one of the things that's noticeable about this movie is, and it's a stark departure from the previous three, especially Mission Impossible 2 and 3, in that the story is that he is supposed to have taken a step back, but but Tom Cruise really is the forefront of all the action. He's the Superman and all of these things, and his whole team is basically a bunch of backup singers. This is the first movie of the series where he really does take a back seat. They give a lot to Jeremy Renner. They give a lot to Paula Patton. They even give some action stuff to Simon Pegg, and he's not the central action figure of the movie in the meat of it. At the beginning, he is, and then there's that sequence at the end with the briefcase, which I said earlier is the funniest, most awesome action thing I've seen in a long time. And to the point where they acknowledge that it's a self-parody. You know, he yells out "Mission accomplished," and then later on, Ving Rhames is teasing him about it. But what did you think of the movie sort of opting to push Cruise more to the sidelines as a coach and give all of the stuff they would typically have given to him in previous movies to these other characters?
You know what? Quite frankly, I like taking a chance on a different direction. I think eventually at some point you have to do that, because it's not like we're talking about somebody for whom it's a character in which we're necessarily deeply invested. It's not like we've exactly given Ethan Hunt a great many layers here in the first place. So Tom Cruise is still in the movie. His face and his name are still there to sell it on the marquee. But quite frankly, I think it does give it a much-needed freshening up to start injecting some other teammates in here. Quite frankly, this is going to seem like an odd gripe, but I kind of missed the presence of Luther throughout the movie. Having Luther only show up at the end in a cameo was kind of disappointing to me. But
here where Gavin is, where the movie suffers from a lack of Ving Rhames.
Oh, you know what? I like what Ving brings to the table, though. I like it. He's not the most charismatic side man in the world, but I've come to like him over the course of 3 movies. However, on the other hand, to kind of contradict Gavin a little bit, I like Simon Pegg. Always have. He's maybe not everybody's cup of tea, but I think he's just the right degree of comic relief. He gets it just right without edging so far over the top that it comes across like he's really trying to steal the scene from everybody else around him.
Nor is he a bungler. You know, we were talking about this with Breaking Bad. If there's one thing I don't like in my heroes, and this should go without saying, but this is what happens with them, is they turn everybody into C-3PO. Everybody has to be, Rob Schneider from Judge Dredd. Sorry to bring up that movie. But, they have to be a bungler and a coward. And, their big moment is when they finally get it right at the end of the movie. And that's not Simon Pegg. Thank God. Yes, he's clearly a fish out of water. They acknowledge the fact at the beginning of the movie that he's a new field agent, and that, this is kind of tight pants and new shoes for him. He's got they ain't quite broken in yet. And that's his arc, that by the end of it, he's sort of forced to confront all of this and say, okay, I'm either a field agent or I'm not. Great. That's all you really needed with him. But along the way, it isn't like he's afraid of the bad guys like you see in some of these people, or, he's constantly fucking things up. There's a measure of control with Simon Pegg that I really enjoy about his character, and you don't often see that in the roles that are cast, similar roles that are cast in other movies. You understand what I'm saying, Sean?
No, I do. And through it all, I also like that you're acknowledging along the way that it's kind of like you're handing the torch off gradually to Jeremy Renner's character as William Brandt, because obviously eventually we're going to get kind of sick after a while of Ethan Hunt's arc, and there's only so far you can really push it. Appropriately, it's kind of like with the Bourne movies. In 3 movies, we told Jason Bourne's story pretty damn well. We wrapped that up. They decided they wanted to continue it, and so they brought on Henner for, oh God, what was the name of the fourth Bourne movie?
The Bourne Pickle?
Legacy. Bourne Legacy.
Bourne Legacy, yes. Thank you, Gavin.
Wouldn't it be funny if Jeremy Renner ends up taking over for every spy genre? Jeremy Renner takes over the Bourne series. He takes over Mission Impossible, and then he'll be the next Bond. This is just be an ongoing thing where he adopts every action spy hero there ever is.
He
takes over and takes Gadget, Matthew Broderick.
I don't know if that's such a good idea because Bourne Legacy didn't exactly go over so hot.
Jeremy Renner should take over as Iron Man. Wouldn't it? That's the next Avengers movie. The third Avengers movie needs to be Jeremy Renner in every part. Like Martin Lawrence. I was going to say, including what's her face, Black Widow. Jeremy Renner should be the white action hero version of Martin Lawrence. Hollywood, are you listening?
Hollywood, ignore him. Don't listen. Don't listen. Pay no attention to the pantsless man in Florida.
There's somebody right now writing this shit down, taking it. Dude, we heard this ridiculous podcast, but he came up with a killer idea.
And my thing is somewhere in Hollywood somebody is going, which pantsless man in Florida?
Going on mugshots.com going, I don't say anything tonight. Who's he talking about?
Sir, do you have any idea how many people are running around the Wang of America without trousers right now?
The sad part about all of this is that years from now, if I'm ever, if I live out my dream of being a consultant on movies, and all of these were, and I'm just trolling the movie industry, trying to see how many of these ridiculous ideas I come up with can be actualized.
Bruce Campbell's not too old to play James Bond.
Well, what was it that we came up with? Oh, it was it was the Jurassic Park podcast where what was the idea that I came up with, Sean? Where damn it!
Oh God, I know because you came up with a truly horrible one, and I started yelling about it almost immediately.
Yeah, I for Gavin's sake and for anyone who hasn't listened to this podcast before, occasionally we'll start drifting into I do this on the Casual Heroes, as a matter of fact, from time to time. I'll start drifting into fantasy booking stuff, and I fantasy booked a Jurassic Park 4 movie. Oh, that was it. The Jurassic the dinosaurs had mounted a revolution, and the movie takes place in the future where the dinosaurs run the Earth. Instead of a planet.
I'll watch it.
Go ahead, Gavin.
I said I'll watch it. You give me that premise, I will be in the theaters opening night.
Yeah, it was supposed to be sort of a Planet of the Apes meets Jurassic Park, where the Velociraptors have acquired so much villainous intelligence that they've actually overthrown the United States and taken over the world. And so the movie takes place in the far future, where there's a band of rebels trying to take the planet back from the dinosaurs. That's Jurassic Park.
There's only two things you need there. You need Andy Serkis to play the lead Velociraptor, and you have to be able to splice in film clips of Charlton Heston.
There you go. Get your hands off of me, you damn dirty.
The movie makes itself.
Yeah, that's what I said.
On paper, it sounds so good, but in reality, it ultimately ends up executing like Birdemic meets Tammy and the T-Rex.
So moving back into Mission Impossible, I think the next movie needs to feature Jeremy Renner in every part. You're welcome, Hollywood.
Getting back to my point, it freshened things up nicely because Tom Cruise probably isn't going to want to do these movies forever. Because who knows, in his little pea brain, he's probably got it in his head that Jack Reacher is going to be his next great franchise. Spoiler, Tom, no. But...
Well, I think that actually makes a good point. To compare this to Jack Reacher for just a moment, I actually think you hit upon something that needs to be at least briefly discussed. the thing that I think the reason why Tom Cruise works in these movies is, one, yes, he is a handsome devil, and it is believable that even though he's Hobbit-sized, that he could get the girl based solely on his looks. Okay, fine. But the other thing that makes these believable is that he is, in many cases, dependent not on his hand-to-hand combat skills. This is where I'm kind of going with this, but he has to depend to a certain degree on his ability to create these elaborate plans to get from point A to point B, and half the fun is watching these elaborate plans play out. And yes, there has to be some fighting, and there has to be some of these elaborate violent action scenes in them, or these movies don't work. But as long as along the way, with the focus of these things is him having to come up with these elaborate action sequences in order to get from A to B, it's believable. It's not believable for him to be Jack Reacher. He's, again, really, really short, and it's not, at least as far, this, and I'll get your opinion on this, Gavin and Sean, in that order. It's not believable for him to be wholly dependent on hand-to-hand fight scenes. I said this before in the first Mission Impossible podcast, and it bears repeating. At some point, I stopped believing that he's that tough. And certainly when I saw the previews for Jack Reacher, I was like, no, I don't buy this. I don't buy Tom Cruise is that tough. Wrong guy for that role. Vin Diesel, The Rock, sure. Tom Cruise, sorry. And that's the thing.
Let's just say it. Jeremy Renner, we would buy in that role.
Yeah, absolutely. So, do you understand what I'm saying, Gavin? It's like they have to watch themselves with the amount of fighting that he does, because to a point, I can't suspend my disbelief any longer. At least not to Jack Reacher level.
He works best in these movies as sort of a human Rube Goldberg machine.
Yes.
Very elaborate, one step after another. Everything has to fall into place perfectly. And when the stars align, then yes, he can do these extraordinary things. And even to a degree with the hand-to-hand combat and the fighting. In a one-on-one situation, if you're selling this guy as an experienced special agent, I'll buy it. I will suspend disbelief. And I'll tell you why I will suspend disbelief. Because currently on WWE programming, they are allowing me to suspend disbelief that 295 pounds of someone with mixed martial arts experience on the highest level with varying degrees of success is struggling with a somewhat pudgy 205-pound professional wrestler in Brock Lesnar and CM Punk. So I'll suspend that disbelief that a 5'3", 135-pound Tom Cruise can beat somebody up. Because you know what? On the right day with the right training, sure, it could happen. But like you said with Jack Reacher, you can't drop him in the middle of five guys and expect me to believe that he's going to walk away unscathed. And especially not throwing out dialogue like, I'll give you the first punch. Well, you had your chance. No, shut up. Shut up.
No, the way that scene should have gone, that scene should have gone like Dos Santos Velasquez 1, where that first punch hits him in the temple and he goes out cold, and then wakes up with his pants down, punched over a garbage can. Sorry. Watch a little much on.
No, I will buy moderate amounts. But ultimately, when I watch Mission Impossible, I want to see Ethan Hunt be the catalyst in a human Rube Goldberg machine.
I'll even take the elaborate, sort of fight sequence where he's trying to get out of the jail, because he wasn't necessarily fighting the entire jail. The jail was rioting itself, and he had a couple of scuffles, but he was taking a lot of guys by surprise. You're talking about very narrow quarters where people don't expect him to do what he was doing, and it was more of him trying to get out of there than it was him, doing his best impression of Bloodsport. So, like, something like that I can live with. But yeah, just people like, why you keep going back to Jack Reacher? Because it's a difference between, a believable action movie versus a completely unbelievable action movie. Is the difference between Mission Impossible and Jack Reacher. As we sort of approach the end of this discussion, I've sort of hit upon the topics really that I wanted to. I mean, we kind of brushed over this or that, but for the most part, I think we covered it. Gavin, as our guest, I want to give you the first crack at this. Anything that you have a burning desire to talk about with Ghost Protocol or the series, things that you feel like you want to hit upon before we start making our way out of this podcast?
I'm just interested to see what they do with the team moving forward after we got the revamp in Ghost Protocol. And as we've sort of touched on here and there, what Ethan Hunt's role becomes, because with the inherent corruption of the IMF and with everything that he's gone through, he's been disavowed, he's been betrayed multiple times, I think a logical progression, and especially if Mission Impossible 5, whatever it ends up being called, is Tom Cruise's last stint as Ethan Hunt, at least in a starring role, would be to see Ethan Hunt elevated to the head of the IMF, where he sort of runs the show now. He handpicks his agents. He delegates assignments. And whether that means Jeremy Renner continues in his role as sort of quote-unquote the agent, and it's a buddy cop film essentially for the next one before he takes the reins completely by himself, or they end up finding another young action star that they can plug into the role going forward, because I think the Mission Impossible franchise will continue with or without Tom Cruise, as long as it is financially viable. But
I have two words for you, Gavin. I have two words for you. You started it and then you hit something, and I now know how they're going to do Mission Impossible 5, and I have two words for you to sum it all up. Follow me on this. I'm take you for a ride. Total Recall. Tom Cruise will be the head of IMF in the next movie, and it'll turns out that he'll have betrayed himself.
You know what? I'm all in. Especially if we can CGI Tom Cruise back to the point that he looks like he did in All the Right Moves. Hey, you know what? If we can CGI him back to that level of youth as he is breaking into the IMF agency, I am 100% in.
Okay, so here's my I'm going to take you for a ride here. Here's how I see this playing out. Tom Cruise and Jeremy Renner playing multiple parts, but they're playing themselves from other movies. So what you'll have is Tom Cruise as the head of IMF, but other people involved in this are the Vampire Lestat, Tom Cruise from All the Right Moves, Jack Reacher. They'll all be there. And then you'll have Hawkeye.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Everyone will be involved. It'll be a two-man movie with multiple parts. And the plot of this thing will be that due to parallel dimensions, essentially this will be Mission Impossible 5, The Crisis of Infinite IMFs.
Oh, dear God.
Hollywood, are you listening?
Oh, Jesus Christ with cupcakes.
I'm sorry, Gavin. I've cut you off when you were in the middle of saying something with my nonsense.
Okay, I stand corrected.
Enjoy your
idea. Your idea is fine as long as the big bad of the whole movie ends up being Les Grossman from Tropic Thunder. Some way or another.
No, it has to be Tom Cruise's character. He will also be the villain. It's Tom Cruise's character from fucking Jeremy Maguire, because his catchphrase is going to be, he'll be a terrorist demanding a ransom, and he'll be yelling out, "Show me the money."
Okay, do you really want that instead of my proposed idea of Les Grossman seeking out the anti-life equation?
Or that. You can go either way.
Come on, can't you imagine Tom Cruise in that same super serial y'all tone that he always cops, like in Valkyrie, just repeating, "Anti-life justifies my hate. Anti-life justifies my hate."
Wasn't that the? I was gonna say, what anti-life justifies my hate. Wasn't that the refrain from a Downset song? No, wait, that's anger, hostility towards the opposition. Never mind.
Oh, dear. Actually, the really funny thing is, there is, well, what this is all reminding me of, there has been an ongoing little miniseries for the last several months on thatguywiththeglasses.com called 50 Shades of Green. I know that we've got some That Guy with the Glasses fans who visit 411 Mania, so maybe they're familiar with this. In it, Lindsay Ellis, who's the nostalgia chick, and her best friend Nella have been basically crowdsourcing a geek-oriented 50 Shades of Grey and coming up with their outline and their ideas by putting all the most crucial decisions out towards their Twitter audience to come up with this. And basically what they came up with was more or less Lovecraftian mommy porn.
Oh, goody.
You know what? This is hearing all these ideas is so making me wish that we could somehow crowdsource the funding to get our version of the next Mission Impossible made, because there's no way the logistics of it are out and out impossible to bring all these franchises together.
I want to film a scene where the vampire Lestat bites Hawkeye and says, "I'm going to give you the choice that no one ever gave me."
God, yes. Oh, holy fuck, yeah. But it has to eventually involve Simon Pegg taking him down with a cricket mallet.
I agree, but I also want to, and this is all I need from this particular actress is just occasionally a shot of Katie Holmes looking confused.
Well, there you go.
And on
I
that
don't know.
note,
Do we want Katie Holmes looking confused or Kristen Stewart looking confused?
Why not both?
Maybe them just kind of standing there looking confused at each other.
This needs to be like the Expendables of summer blockbusters. Just we bring together everybody from a summer blockbuster that we possibly can. Every character, every actor and actress. Although, admittedly, yes, Twilight's a fall blockbuster. But
all right. So Gavin, that brings us to the end of this discussion. We certainly have enjoyed your commentary. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the Casual Heroes, what you do there, and plug anything you got going on. Easy, Sean. Googly.
www.thecasualheroes.com. You can find myself and my good friends Chris and Jed and White Dwayne, who is not a racist. And ever so often, Mark Radulich joins us as well. We got a lot of podcasts over there covering stuff like comics, movies, wrestling, sports, especially with the NFL season getting underway. And tonight we are actually, after I leave this podcast, I'll actually be jumping on a call with Chris to speak to Evan Young and Lou Avino, creators of The Last West, a comic book that just gained its funding from Kickstarter and will be published by Alterna Press. So hop on over to thecasualheroes.com. Give a listen to that in a couple of days once we get all the audio sorted out and posted. I think you'll enjoy, if you're a comic book fan or if you're a science fiction fan, what these guys are doing and what they'll have to offer. Other than that, we've got Raw recaps, stuff like that over there. You can follow us on Twitter at The Casual Heroes, and that'll keep you pretty much up to date with everything we've got going on. I appreciate you guys having me on tonight. Really enjoyed it.
I'm good. And anytime you want to come back, just let us know. I really do want to get people to go over to thecasualheroes.com. It's easily, and as somebody who listens to a lot of audiobooks and listens to a lot of podcasts, besides the ones that I produce, they are the most entertaining podcasts that I've listened to on the internet, not named Freakonomics. So definitely give the Casual Heroes a listen. Sean, go ahead and plug your stuff.
First, it was an absolute pleasure having Gavin on the show. Great to get a chance to chat with somebody that I've been reading on 411 for quite a while. That's half the fun of this job for me. Now, as far as plugging my stuff / our stuff, every Sunday night I've got my new column, Give Life Back to Music, on 411 Mania Music Zone. Coming up this week, I have got part 3 of my Kanye West retrospective, where I'm going to be taking a closer, more personal look at his third album, Graduation. To to be rescheduled sometime soon once I've had a chance to touch base again with Jeremy Lambert. We will soon be returning to Bad Movie Review Club to do our next movie, which is Steven Seagal versus the Vampires in Against the Night. It's been rescheduled, but I'm still working on developing my new gaming podcast with Sam or Katie called The Lost Weekend. What else? Oh, big announcement about Long Road to Ruin, actually. I didn't quite get around to this at the top of the show, so I'm going to do it now. This may be one of the last shows of an era at Long Road to Ruin. No, Mark and I are not going anywhere. However, I got an email last week from James from Manic Expression, who informed me that they're soon to be starting up their own YouTube channel. And James really honored Mark and I by asking us if we wanted to contribute our show to it. And I, of course, told him, just let us get the logistics worked out. And yes, we would love to do it. One of the logistics we got to work out is it's entirely possible this may be one of the last all-audio versions of Long Road to Ruin. We may soon be going to video. Mark and I are working on it right now, but it's entirely possible that we may be going to a Google Hangouts format. More on that as we develop it, but if we do, chances are that new format is going to be debuting in October. Mark, here's the part where I got to bring something up to you about next week's show. It seems that we may have to completely rework how we do the next 6 weeks of shows. Jason may not be able to make the show in time next week, or 2 weeks from now. He has got a book signing that he's got to attend to, and he's not sure he's going to be able to get away from it in time to make the show. So what I am proposing is that we maybe jump into one of the franchises we've been putting off for a while, and instead put off doing Alien, Predator, and AVP until perhaps after January.
Okay.
What I'm suggesting is to throw a couple out there that we've talked about. Is you had mentioned wanting to do Rambo sometime in the near future, and we still have yet to do Transformers.
So I'm thinking that the next two, in 2 weeks from tonight, we'll do First Blood and Rambo First Blood Part 2, and then a month from now, we'll be doing Rambos 3 and 4. So that'll be a 2-part podcast looking at the entire Rambo series, all 4 movies. And hopefully by the time we get to the second half of the Rambo podcast, Jeremy Lambert will be available 2 weeks after that to do Transformers, and that'll take us the 6 weeks that we needed to get to October.
Yep, and then of course in October, the main man, the pantsless reporter who mortifies us all, is going to be going on vacation for a month, and so he's handing the keys to the kingdom over to me. God help our beloved audience. And we're going to take that time to get to a franchise that I have been wanting to dissect ever since we started this show almost a year ago. It is going to be myself and my special guest co-host Robert Winfrey, who are going to spend 2 shows jumping all over the Hellraiser franchise. Since there's so many movies, we're going to take one show and we're going to talk about 3 good movies. That is, we're going to talk about Hellraiser, Hellraiser 2, and the surprisingly good Hellraiser Inferno. We're then going to take the next show, and since I know that some of you have just so very much fun listening to me scream and curse about movies that I hate, we're then going to spend an entire show talking about every movie that I hate in this franchise, which, God help you, is probably going to include a brief Paranormal Activity 4 proportions rant about Hellraiser Revelations. So that's going to be our way of celebrating Halloween, and that gives you a pretty good idea of just what to expect for about the next 2.5 months Long Road to Ruin.
All right. In addition to forthcoming Long Road to Ruins, you can check out our previous shows. First half of the Mission Impossible, which is just Sean and I. Our Jurassic Park discussion, Jurassic Park trilogy. Prior to that, what did we do? I don't remember.
Can you believe we've been at this for almost a full year already?
Yeah, and we got off to a kind of a slow start, but once January rolled around and we got back into the thick of it again with Spider-Man, despite some of the problems we had with that show, we've been consistently doing these every other week pretty much without fail, and we've turned out a lot of good shows. Superman, Batman. I wasn't kidding when I said everyone. We've got people that tweet us and check us out on Facebook that say they want to come on the show and discuss these movies with us. So, Gavin, you'll have to get with me again, and let me know what franchise that we haven't covered yet that you want to come back on and talk about. And that's what I tell people. If you got a burning desire, if you got a favorite franchise that you want to have a discussion about, just let us know. And outside of sort of the odd horror movie that I'm not really interested in, I'll give anything a shot. So in addition to the Long Road to Ruin, go ahead and check out the Metal Hammer of Doom podcast. The last show was a bit of a train wreck. Just wait. Our Halo of Blood podcast, Children of Bodom, started off okay and then quickly went off the rails, which is what happens when you put a very tired Mark Radulich with fun-time Robert Cooper together. So go ahead and check that out and see what happens when I go completely off script. Prior to that, we covered Black Sabbath. We had another 411 alumnus, Sean Garmer, on. And then before that was a series of podcasts focusing on the good, the bad, and the horrible of Megadeth. So there's that every Sunday night, except for whenever there's a WWE pay-per-view or I'm sick like I was last Sunday, is the 401 Ground and Pound radio show. MMA discussion, the news of the day, analysis, etc., with myself, Pat Mullen, Robert Winfrey, and Jeff Harris. And, of course, check me out whenever the Casual Heroes deign to have me on. Always enjoy being on their podcast. I eventually want to get back on and talk about TV shows so that I can gush incessantly about The Wire. And now I can talk about Breaking Bad, too. So I'm very anxious to get back on the Casual Heroes and talk about TV shows like The Wire, The Shield, Breaking Bad, Oz, etc. We need to have this discussion. I'm chomping at the bit, Mr. Gavin.
We've been sort of interview heavy for the last couple of weeks. We had Rob Schamberger, the guy that's doing all of the portraits of the world champions in wrestling. We had him on. We've got Evan and Lou tonight, and then coming up very soon, we're trying to hammer out A Day in Time with Robert Venditti, the gentleman that wrote Surrogates, the Bruce Willis movie. He wrote the novel that was based on, and he's now the lead writer on Green Lantern for DC Comics. And once we get through this deal with where we've got all the interviews going on, we're going to get back into a more regular podcasting schedule. So hopefully we can get that done soon, because I have recently just started Breaking Bad. And while some of the subject matter hits a little close to home, the cancer, not the mess, I've enjoyed the first season, and I'm getting ready to jump into the second season, and I would actually be able to participate in that discussion now. So look forward to it.
I have one question. You have to answer it in 50 words or less, preferably 10 words or less. Does Jesse annoy you as much as he does me?
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Really?
I love the fact. I love the fact that he plays the role. At least in the first season, he doesn't annoy me. He's a perfect counterbalance to Walter White.
Nope. As I said on Facebook, I want Omar from The Wire to show up on come back to life, show up on a bus, and blow Jesse's head off with his sawed-off shotgun. I need the cast from The Wire to come in and violate the cast from Breaking Bad. Show them what's what in the butt. That's what I need.
As I progress through the seasons, I'll let you know how I feel about Jesse. But at least through the first 7 episodes, I'm okay with.
All right, fair enough.
I got to admit, Gavin, I've got to go listen to some of your comic podcasts, because as I was telling Mark before the show, I'm actually kind of a comic book newbie. I recently decided to go back and really start diving into my DC lore and getting really well acquainted with it, going clear back to the Silver Age. So it'll be good to hear a little bit more about what others think of the more recent New 52 and some other books, because I've heard varying things. I've heard some people who love New 52 in particular, and others who think it's absolutely the worst, most unnecessary thing ever.
Oh, believe me, I've heard Gavin go on a rant about the New 52, and we don't have time for it, but 10 words, go, Gavin.
Follow me on Twitter at Gavin Napier TCH, and we can discuss the New 52.
And with the financial disaster that has been for DC. All right, folks, that's it for this show. We'll be back in 2 weeks with the first half of our, for me at least, much anticipated Rambo podcast. Rambo is probably one of my First Blood's probably one of my most favorite movies of all time. In fact, go listen to the Casual Heroes movie cast from a few weeks ago and watch as I go into an epileptic meltdown over where IGN placed First Blood and its all-time greatest action movies. So, with that said, yes, Gavin was there and almost walked off the podcast because he said, "What's the point? What is the point?" So, with that said, be well, be safe, and behave. We'll see you in 2 weeks.